Gale has become one of the most annoying brawlers to face against during his metas, being a frustrating enemy for all tanks, and even brawlers of other classes if Gale is meta. His entire kit has been fine-tuned to cause the most amount of frustration to tanks, from his super, his gadgets, his star powers, and his hypercharge, destroying any tanks that come into his path with basically no skill. As always, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. Only 15% of you are subscribed, so try and get that number up. If you have disposable income and want some nice perks, and to support me, you can also become a channel member. Also, join our Discord server and watch the full video if you're interested in the topic, and enjoy. Let's start out with the basics. Gale has a solid health at 7600 health, and a normal movement speed. His attack sees him shoot 6 projectiles that are right next to each other, making it look like a rectangle with a wide attack width of 2. Each projectile deals 560 damage, for a potential total of 3360 damage, at a range of 8.33. He reloads every 1.2 seconds, which is very fast, and has a projectile speed of 3000. The nature of his main attack means that unlike someone like Pam, who has individual projectiles, Gale can never deal the potential total of his damage. His wide spread and his fast reload speed show that he is good for dealing a lot of chip damage at a range, somewhat like Jean, though Jean is much better at long range, while Gale is much better at a close range. Next, let's go over his super. Gale's super sees him shoot a bigger version of his regular attack, but this one actually pushes away enemies and goes through obstacles. It has a very long range of 10, and unlike his main attack, it's a singular projectile that deals 1200 damage, with an extremely wide attack width of 4. This super is basically guaranteed to hit whoever you aim at, and is best used to get enemies away from you or your teammates, and it's extremely good at doing that, with the pushback basically resetting the enemy brawler/brawlers to a much less advantageous position. However, you could also use it to assassinate low health brawlers due to the long range, being able to shoot through walls, and the low chance of missing. As you can see, Gale doesn't seem to have many visible weaknesses. His health is solid, he isn't particularly slow, his range is good, and his shots are easy to hit. And finally, his super basically removes anyone from getting too close to him. Now that the glaze session is over, let's talk about his actual weaknesses. Gale has 2 big weaknesses, to marksman and to artillery. Gale is weak to marksman because almost nothing in his kit really helps against them. Sure, his main attack is wide and easy to hit, but how are you going to hit the enemy if you can't even reach them? His attack range of 8.33 is solid, but nothing compared to that of marksman. Gale is also weak to artillery, or as they are more commonly known, throwers. First of all, Gale has a normal movement speed. Unless you have a fast or better movement speed, throwers won't find too much difficulty in hitting their shots if they are good, and can easily cause annoyance to you. So what else can Gale do to face off against them? Well, he has no real tools in his kit other than his jump pad gadget, which I'll talk about later. But even with that, Thrower can see you coming from a mile away, and easily retreat, or kill you before you even know what's going on. Gale's super could also work against throwers as it shoots through walls. However, there are 2 problems with this. You have to get your super, and you won't be able to deal enough damage to kill the thrower. Getting your super will not be an easy task against the thrower, and you will most definitely have to rely on the help of your teammates in order to even deal damage to them. Overall, it's just an unsavory matchup for Gale that he most often loses. These weaknesses pale in comparison to Gale's strength, the tank killer. Along with Colette and Surge, Gale forms the big 3 of tank killers. Basically 90% of his base form and 95% of his unlockables that I will talk about soon are made for tank obliteration. First of all, his main attack. One of the main reasons that brawlers like Piper or Belle aren't the best into tanks is that their shots are not easy to hit. If the tank has good dodges, they can easily push up and defeat the Piper or Belle despite having minimal range in comparison. However, Gale doesn't suffer from this with an extremely wide attack. Due to most tanks having a large hitbox, Gale will easily hit 99% of his shots on tanks, allowing him to deal important and consistent damage, but most importantly, get his super. Second reason why Gale destroys tanks is super. Also, you should probably settle back and relax, because there's a lot of reasons why he destroys tanks. If you're a tank main like I am, I'm sorry in advance for the pain this might cause you. Anyway, the super countering tanks is pretty self-explanatory. It pushes back enemies. Basically every tank main's purpose is to get close to enemies, and this just says no to that. Imagine spending an eternity to get your super as an El Primo, and you jump on the nearest enemy at a low health, which is a Gale, and then he supers you, and you're back to where you started. To make matters worse, it goes through walls, and it's literally impossible to miss. So if the super is aimed at you, it isn't missing, just like Kid Cudi on Passion, Pain, and Demon Slaying. Third reason why Gale destroys tanks is Twister Gadget. So let's say you got caught by a tank, or honestly anyone who's good at close range. What are you gonna do? Simple, use your Twister Gadget. The Twister Gadget creates a small tornado with a tool tie radius that pushes back enemies that are inside of it, and knocks back any enemy that tries to go onto the Twister. This is one of the most cheesy and annoying gadgets in the game. This literally blocks off an entire lane for 5 seconds, which seems short, but in a real game, takes an eternity to finish. This is especially useful in something like Brawl Ball, and can seal off the goal for a few valuable seconds. But its main use is against tanks and other close range brawlers. It's basically a mini Gale super, pushing back enemies and forcing them to stay back for 5 seconds, giving Gale valuable time to either kill the enemy or just run away, leaving the tank to do nothing but watch as their target frustratingly escapes. Guess what? There's a fourth reason Gale destroys tanks. This time it's his Blustery Blow star power. Blustery Blow sees him stun enemies for 1.2 seconds if they are pushed against obstacles. This is a bit of a situational star power, because you won't be able to push back enemies into walls all the time, so you won't always get value out of the star power. However, when you are able to use the super to push enemies into walls, this is an incredible star power. Not only do you get the pushback and damage, but you can also get a pretty long stun for 1.2 seconds. Almost as long as Dyna's Hypercharge Gadget. If the matchup between Gales and tanks wasn't bad enough already, this makes it 100 times worse, letting Gale easily get more damage off of the tank and charge up his super, or simply just run away and get to safety. Now let's move on to talking about... Just kidding, there's a fifth reason why Gale destroys tanks. What's the reason, you may ask? Or you may not, as you're trying to close your ears to this tank slander. But anyway, this reason is his second star power, Freezing Snow. This star power sees Gale's main attack have a slowing effect for 0.5 seconds. First a pushback, then a stun, and now a slow? Is Gale competing for the most crowd control abilities in a brawler? Because if he is, he's definitely winning. Sorry, got a little off track there. Being able to slow with every single attack is extremely powerful, and there's a reason why he's the only brawler able to do that everywhere with his star power. And against tanks, this is even better. Most tanks have a higher than average movement speed to help approach enemies even without their specific tools for approaching. But this star power completely negates that. Sure, it doesn't slow for too long, but with multiple attacks, it can definitely slow the tank down enough to where the tank no longer poses any threat. Oh, you thought that was it? Yeah, no. There's one more, and it might just be the most toxic. Gale's Hypercharge. Gale's Hypercharge is basically his super, but 3 tiles wider, and it pushes enemies even farther back. But the main feature of it is that it sees Gale shoot 2 supers instead of 1. As you can tell, this is extremely annoying to anyone, not only tanks. But for tanks especially, it's a death sentence. There's no way they are missing the Hypercharge super. It deals even more damage, and it pushes you even further back from Gale. It shreds basically any tank, or even anyone in general that's close to Gale, generally being an oppressive and frustrating thing to deal against. And speaking of frustration, like my video on Tick, which you should definitely check out, let's talk about how a Gale meta can be extremely frustrating and annoying to deal with. I've talked a lot about the frustration that Gale can cause to tanky brawlers, but when he becomes meta, suddenly he can hold his own against brawlers of every kind, not just tanks. As I've said earlier, Gale is quite weak against brawlers like throwers and marksmen. However, a lot of the maps Gale is good on, you wouldn't really play marksman against him. And even if you did, Gale could still probably hold his own if he's in a powerful state of balance, with his relatively high health, his okay range, and whatnot. If he's high in the meta, you can probably assume his supercharge rate is high, and his super and his hypercharge are the only two things that he needs to have a chance against marksmen. And his star powers and jump pad gadgets certainly can't hurt as well. Against throwers, what I said with marksman still rings true. His super is probably being charged more often, so he can fare a little bit better against throwers, though not by much. However, his matchups against other classes become very good. He can easily fare well against basically all other damage dealers except for the long-ranged ones, and bully them like he does against tanks, though he does have to be a little more careful due to most of them actually having range. And against assassins, he basically becomes a hard counter. Most assassins thrive best at closer ranges, and Gale thrives against brawlers at a closer range, as I've remarked upon at length. This is why when you see an assassin meta, Gale is often also very strong, due to being able to counter these brawlers, which gets exemplified even further when Gale is individually strong, like he was with his Hypercharge, able to destroy assassins at ease. But let's talk about why he is such an annoying brawler to face off against. I hinted at it earlier, but the biggest reason he is such an annoying brawler to face is that he has so many crowd control abilities. Crowd control abilities are inherently meant to be annoying. They prevent you from operating at full capacity, making you unable to fight on an even playing field as your opponent. Things like stuns, slows, and knockbacks all prevent the player from operating as normal, and having an even chance to kill the enemy, which can definitely feel frustrating and annoying to play against. Now imagine one brawler having all three abilities, two technically. That brawler won't be fun to play against, right? And that's Gale. He constantly makes it an unfair fight, either with his knockback super, his slow star power, and his stun star power. Sure, he's been balanced to counteract this, but in the moment when you're facing him, it genuinely feels unfair to constantly fight him at a disadvantage. With Gale's easy to hit shots, you're getting slowed extremely often with basically no skill involved at all. With Gale's even easier to hit super and hypercharge, he can stop your attack with the push of a button and can even kill you or stun you so that you will be killed regardless. And as a bonus, Gale's twisted gadget can cut off an entire lane for 5 seconds with, you guessed it, just a push of a button. With the relatively low amount of skill to play him and the feeling of unfairness that comes with playing against him, it's no wonder why Gale is one of the most frustrating and annoying brawlers to play against, and an absolute nightmare to face off against, especially when he's meta, and can wreak havoc against your team, even without tanks. Overall, Gale has been fashioned to be a tank destroyer. Many elements of his kit counter tanks, basically preventing them from any access to be even remotely near Gale. And it gets even worse when Gale is meta, as he's able to put up a fight against his counters, as well as counter other classes as well. His many crowd control abilities that can be accessed with relatively low skill make him extremely annoying and frustrating to play against, becoming even worse when he is meta. Yeah, I never talked about the jump pad gadget later. Oops. Anyway, thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.